a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, or yagé, is an entheogenic brew made out of Banisteriopsis sapi vine and other ingredients. The brew is used as a traditional spiritual medicine in ceremonies among the indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin and is known by a number of different names. Sapi contains several alkaloids that act as monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Another common ingredient in ayahuasca is the shrub Psychotria verdaris, which contains the primary psychoactive compound, dimethyltryptamine. MAOIs are required for DMT to be orally active. Nomenclature. Ayahuasca is known by many names throughout northern South America and Brazil. Ayahuasca is the Hispanicized spelling of a word in the Quechua languages, which is spoken in the Andean states of Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia. Speakers of Quechua languages or of the Aymara language may prefer the spelling ayahuasca. This word refers both to the liana Banisteriopsis sapi, and to the brew prepared from it. In the Quechua languages, aya means spirit, soul, corpse, dead body, and huasca means rope and woody vine, liana. The word ayahuasca has been variously translated as liana of the soul, liana of the dead, and spirit liana. In Brazil, the brew and the liana are informally called either sapi or sapo. The latter is the Portuguese word for liana. In the Untitled vegetal of Brazil, an organized spiritual tradition in which people drink ayahuasca, the brew is prepared exclusively from sapi and Psychotria verdaris. Adherents of Untitled vegetal call this brew hosca, or vegetal Brazilian Yawa call the brew uni. The Achua people and Cha'ao people of Ecuador and Peru call it natum, whereas the Share and Awa peoples of Peru call it shori. History. In the 16th century, Christian missionaries from Spain and Portugal first encountered indigenous South Americans using ayahuasca. Their earliest reports described it as the work of the devil. In the 20th century, the active chemical constituent of sapi was named telepethine, but it was found to be identical to a chemical already isolated from Peganum harmala and was given the name harmin. Writer William S. Burroughs read a paper by Richard Evans Schultz on the subject and while traveling through South America in the early 1950s sought out yagé in the hopes that it could relieve or cure opiate addiction. Ayahuasca became more widely known when the McKenna brothers published their experience in the Amazon in True Hallucinations. Dennis McKenna later studied pharmacology, botany, and chemistry of ayahuasca and ukuhi, which became the subject of his master's thesis. Richard Evans Schultz allowed for Claudio Naranjo to make a special journey by canoe up the Amazon River to study yagé with the South American Indians. He brought back samples of the beverage and published the first scientific description of the effects of its active alkaloids. In Brazil, a number of modern religious movements based on the use of ayahuasca have emerged, the most famous of them being Santo Daime and the Untitled vegetal, usually in an animistic context that may be shamanistic or, more often, integrated with Christianity. Both Santo Daime and Untitled vegetal now have members and churches throughout the world. Similarly, the US and Europe have started to see new religious groups develop in relation to increased ayahuasca use. Some Westerners have teamed up with shamans in the Amazon rainforest regions, forming ayahuasca healing retreats that claim to be able to cure mental and physical illness and allow communication with the spirit world. In recent years, the brew has been popularized by Wade Davis, English novelist Martin Goodman in I Was Carlos Castaneda, Chilean novelist Isabel Allende, writer Kira Saluk, author Jeremy Narby, author Jay Griffiths, American novelist Stephen Peck, and radio personality Robin Quivers. Preparation. Sections of Banisteriopsis sapi vine are macerated and boiled alone or with leaves from any of a number of other plants, including Psychotria verdaris or Diplopteris cabrana, Mimosa tenuiflora, among other ingredients which can vary greatly from one shaman to the next. The resulting brew may contain the powerful psychedelic drug DMT and MAO inhibiting harmala alkaloids. which are necessary to make the DMT orally active. The traditional making of ayahuasca follows a ritual process that requires the user to pick the lower chakrana leaf at sunrise, then say a prayer. The vine must be cleaned meticulously with wooden spoons and pounded with wooden mallets until its fiber. Brews can also be made with no DMT-containing plants. Psychotria verdiris being substituted by plants such as Justicia pectoralis, Brugmansia, or sacred tobacco, also known as mapacho, or sometimes left out with no replacement. This brew varies radically from one batch to the next, both in potency and psychoactive effect, based mainly on the skill of the shaman or brewer, as well as other admixtures sometimes added in the intent of the ceremony. Natural variations in plant alkaloid content and profiles also affect the final concentration of alkaloids in the brew, and the physical act of cooking may also serve to modify the alkaloid profile of harmful alkaloids. The actual preparation of the brew takes several hours, often taking place over the course of more than one day. After adding the plant material, each separately at this stage, to a large pot of water, it is boiled until the water is reduced by half in volume. The individual brews are then added together and brewed until reduced significantly. This combined brew is what is taken by participants in ayahuasca ceremonies. Traditional usage. Ayahuasca is used largely as a treasured sacrament. People who work with ayahuasca in non-traditional contexts often align themselves with the philosophies and cosmologies associated with ayahuasca shamanism, as practiced among indigenous peoples like the Ararina of the Peruvian Amazon, while non-native users know of the spiritual applications of ayahuasca. A less well-known traditional usage focuses on the medicinal properties of ayahuasca. When used for its medicinal purposes, ayahuasca affects the human consciousness for less than 6 hours, beginning half an hour after consumption and peaking after 2 hours. In some cases, individuals experience significant psychological stress during the experience. Ayahuasca also has cardiovascular effects, moderately increasing heart rate and diastolic blood pressure. It is for this reason that extreme caution should be taken with those who may be at risk of heart disease. The psychedelic effects of ayahuasca include visual and auditory stimulation, the mixing of sensory modalities, and psychological introspection that may lead to great elation, fear, or illumination. Its purgative properties are important. The intense vomiting and occasional diarrhea it induces can clear the body of worms and other tropical parasites, and harmful alkaloids themselves have been shown to be anthelmintic. Thus, this action is twofold. A direct action on the parasites by these harmful alkaloids works to kill the parasites, and parasites are expelled through the increased intestinal motility that is caused by these alkaloids. Dietary taboos are often associated with the use of ayahuasca. In the rainforest, these tend towards the purification of oneself, abstaining from spicy and heavily seasoned foods, excess fat, salt, caffeine, acidic foods and sex before, after, or during a ceremony. A diet low in foods containing tyramine has been recommended, as the speculative interaction of tyramine and MAOIs could lead to a hypertensive crisis. However, evidence indicates that harmful alkaloids act only on MAOI, in a reversible way similar to metlabemide. Dietary restrictions are not used by the highly urban Brazilian ayahuasca church Untitled Vegetal, suggesting the risk is much lower than perceived and probably non-existent. Role of shamans. Shamans and experienced users of ayahuasca advise against consuming ayahuasca when not in the presence of one or several well-trained shamans. In some areas, there are purported brewhors who masquerade as real shamans and who entice tourists to drink ayahuasca in their presence. Shamans believe one of the purposes for this is to steal one's energy and/or power, of which they believe every person has a limited stockpile. Traditional brew. Traditional ayahuasca brews are usually made with Banisteriopsis sapi as an MAOI, while dimethyltryptamine sources and other admixtures vary from region to region. There are several varieties of sapi, often known as different colors, with varying effects, potencies, and uses. DMT admixtures. Other common admixtures with their associated ceremonial values and spirits. Non-traditional usage. In the late 20th century, the practice of ayahuasca drinking began spreading to Europe, North America and elsewhere. The first ayahuasca churches, affiliated with the Brazilian Santo Daime, were established in the Netherlands. A legal case was filed against two of the church's leaders, Hans Bogers and Geraldine Feeneman. Bogers and Feeneman were charged with distributing a controlled substance. However, the prosecution was unable to prove that the use of ayahuasca by members of the Santo Daime constituted a sufficient threat to public health, an order such that it warranted denying their rights to religious freedom under ECHR Article 9. The 2001 verdict of the Amsterdam District Court is an important precedent. Since then, groups that are not affiliated to the Santo Daime have used ayahuasca, and a number of different styles have been developed, including non-religious approaches. Ayahuasca analogues. In modern Europe and North America, ayahuasca analogues are often prepared using non-traditional plants which contain the same alkaloids. For example, seeds of the Syrian rue plant can be used as a substitute for the ayahuasca vine, and the DMT-rich Mimosa hostilis is used in place of chacrana. Australia has several indigenous plants which are popular among modern ayahuascarists there, such as various DMT-rich species of acacia. The name, ayahuasca, specifically refers to a botanical decoction that contains Banisteriopsis sapi. A synthetic version, known as pharmacology, is a combination of an appropriate MAOI and typically DMT. In this usage, the DMT is generally considered the main psychoactive active ingredient, while the MAOI merely preserves the psychoactivity of orally ingested DMT, which would otherwise be destroyed in the gut before it could be absorbed in the body. In contrast, traditionally among Amazonian tribes, the BSRP vine is considered to be the spirit of ayahuasca, the gatekeeper and guide to the otherworldly realms. Brews similar to ayahuasca may be prepared using several plants not traditionally used in South America. DMT admixtures, MAOI admixtures. Chemistry and pharmacology. Harmalar alkaloids are MAO-inhibiting beta-carbolins. The three most studied harmalar alkaloids in the BSRP vine are harmin, harmalin and tetrahydroarmin. Harmin and harmalin are selective and reversible inhibitors of monoamine oxidase A, while tetrahydroarmin is a weak serotonin reuptake inhibitor. This inhibition of MAO allows DMT to diffuse unmetabolized past the membranes in the stomach and small intestine, and eventually cross the blood-brain barrier to activate receptor sites in the brain. Without tremors or the non-selective, non-reversible monoamine oxidase inhibition by drugs like phenelzine and tranylcypromine, DMT would be oxidized by monoamine oxidase enzymes in the digestive tract. Individual polymorphisms in the cytochrome P452D6 enzyme affect the ability of individuals to metabolize harmin. Some natural tolerance to habitual use of ayahuasca may develop through upregulation of the serotonergic system. A Phase 1 pharmacokinetic study on ayahuasca with 15 volunteers was conducted in 1993. During the Ayahuasca project, a review of the Ayahuasca project has been published. Effects. People who have consumed ayahuasca report having mystical or religious experiences and spiritual revelations regarding their purpose on Earth, the true nature of the universe, as well as deep insight into how to be the best person they possibly can. This is viewed by many as a spiritual awakening and what is often described as a rebirth. In addition, it is often reported that individuals feel they gain access to higher spiritual dimensions and make contact with various spiritual or extra-dimensional beings who can act as guides or healers. Author Don Jose Campos claims that people may experience profound positive life changes subsequent to consuming ayahuasca. Vomiting can follow ayahuasca ingestion. This purging is considered by many shamans and experienced users of ayahuasca to be an essential part of the experience, as it represents the release of negative energy and emotions built up over the course of one's life. Others report purging in the form of vomiting, diarrhea, and hot/cold flushes. The ingestion of ayahuasca can also cause significant, but temporary, emotional and psychological distress. Excessive use could possibly lead to serotonin syndrome. The temporary non-entheogenic effects of ayahuasca can, depending on dosage, include tremors, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, autonomic instability, hypothermia, sweating, motor function impairment, sedation, relaxation, vertigo, dizziness, and muscle spasms, which are primarily caused by the harmful alkaloids in ayahuasca. Long-term negative effects are not known. A few deaths due to participation in the consumption of ayahuasca have been reported, although none have been linked specifically to ayahuasca itself, but are usually said to be due to other factors. Some of the deaths may have been due to unscreened pre-existing heart conditions, interaction with drugs, such as antidepressants, recreational drugs, caffeine, or nicotine, or from improper or irresponsible use due to behavioral risks or possible drug-to-drug interactions. In 2018, it was reported that a single dose of ayahuasca significantly reduced symptoms of treatment-resistant depression in a small placebo-controlled trial. Legal status. Internationally, DMT is a Schedule I drug under the Convention on Psychotropic Substances. The commentary on the Convention on Psychotropic Substances notes, however, that the plants containing it are not subject to international control. The cultivation of plants from which psychotropic substances are obtained is not controlled by the Vienna Convention. Neither the crown of the peyote cactus nor the roots of the plant Mimosa hostilis nor psilocybe mushrooms themselves are included in Schedule I, but only their respective principles, mescaline, DMT, and psilocin. A fax from the Secretary of the International Narcotics Control Board to the Netherlands Ministry of Public Health sent in 2001 goes on to state that, consequently, preparations made of these plants, including ayahuasca, are not under international control and, therefore, not subject to any of the articles of the 1971 Convention. Despite the INCB's 2001 affirmation that ayahuasca is not subject to drug control by international convention, in its 2010 annual report the board recommended that governments consider controlling ayahuasca at the national level. This recommendation by the INCB has been criticized as an attempt by the board to overstep its legitimate mandate and as establishing a reason for governments to violate the human rights of ceremonial ayahuasca drinkers. The legal status in the United States of DMT-containing plants is somewhat ambiguous. Ayahuasca plants and preparations are legal, as they contain no scheduled chemicals. However, brews made using DMT-containing plants are illegal since DMT is a Schedule I drug. That said, some people are challenging this, using arguments similar to those used by peyotist religious sects, such as the Native American Church. A court case allowing the Untitled vegetal to import and use the tea for religious purposes in the United States, Gonzales v. O Centro Espírita Beneficente Untitled vegetal, was heard by the U.S. Supreme Court on November 1, 2005. The decision, released February 21, 2006, allows the UDV to use the tea in its ceremonies pursuant to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. In a similar case in Ashland, Oregon-based Santo Daime Church sued for their right to import and consume ayahuasca tea. In March 2009, U.S. District Court Judge Panna ruled in favor of the Santo Daime, acknowledging its protection from prosecution under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Religious use in Brazil was legalized after two official inquiries into the tea in the mid-1980s, which concluded that ayahuasca is not a recreational drug and has valid spiritual uses. In France, Santo Daime won a court case allowing them to use the tea in early 2005. However, they were not allowed an exception for religious purposes, but rather for the simple reason that they did not perform chemical extractions to end up with pure tea, and harmala and the plants used were not scheduled. 4 months after the court victory, the common ingredients of ayahuasca as well as harmala were declared stupefacts, or narcotic Schedule I substances, making the tea and its ingredients illegal to use or possess. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?